and thank you very much for coming along again this evening. We're going to look very carefully at a series of very unsettling events, in a sense, in this recent week, because at a time when much of the Earth is now experiencing the dramatic aspects of climate change, the increase in heat waves and drought, and the devastation of agricultural lands in the process, something we'll look at in the future, we're also demonstrating that we can't cope with the one thing that's most plentiful on the Earth's surface, water. Because of the heating up of the global system, water is cycling much more quickly. It's evaporating, moving through the atmosphere, and precipitating at a faster rate. It's churning through the system much more quickly. And the results can be heavy downpours and flooding circumstances in some parts of the world and absolute drought in other parts of the world. Meanwhile, because much of the heat on the Earth's surface is expressing itself both in the North and the South Pole, we're getting a disappearance of global ice, both in high latitudes and in high altitudes. Mountain glaciers are disappearing as well, and when that water from the ice flows down the glaciers and the hillsides and into the rivers and then the oceans, and the water from the glaciers both in the North Pole and the South Pole shrinks and the water expands into the oceans of the world, we're getting a rise in sea level. So our crisis might be said to be a crisis on the only known blue planet in the universe. And it has to do with the most plentiful substance on that planet, water. And the question is, very simply, can we learn to manage water and live sustainably on this, the largest living spaceship in the known universe? Where else do we think we can survive? Do we think we can send contraptions to other parts of the world, other parts of the known universe, other parts of the solar system, land on them, and live for a few hours, maybe even a few days, in Earth-simulated environments, and call that a solution? I don't think so. In fact, we're in real trouble because we've become very fascinated with space travel at a time when we haven't paid attention to the basics of living and learning how to manage water sustainably on the largest living spaceship in the known universe. We don't have to go anywhere to go into space. Just take a look at the picture. We're in space. We're in space already. The question is, can we survive on this spaceship that we did not create, cannot control, and are in the process of destroying? We've seen recent attempts by the Indians to go to the moon. It's quite impressive. It was launched in July, and they expect to get there in September.
We've been to the moon, we've been to the Mars, and we are going to the moon yet again. So what's special about Chandrayaan 2? Well, this time we're actually going to be landing a robot on the moon, make that robot go around the moon even, and possibly look at the moon as a space station even for the future. These are long-term plans, of course, but we have to take those first steps today. And yes, did I mention, it's two women who are actually steering this project from start to finish. Here's a look at why exactly Chandrayaan 2 is so special for India.
10 years after its first lunar mission, the Indian Space Research Organization is finding its way to the moon again. The 384,000 kilometer journey will take 50 days. The orbiter, lander and rover together carry 14 instruments to carry out different scientific experiments.
Chandrayaan-2 objective is to land at a place which no other people are not gone. So we are selected near South Pole, and this particular mission, unlike Chandrayaan-1, here we wanted a soft land, and also we wanted to carry out in situ experiments, mainly for the new science, that is objectives.
It's an intriguing journey. For 20 days, the lunar craft will be maneuvered from the ground station in Bengaluru until it's pushed into translunar orbit from its orbit around the Earth. On September 1st, Chandrayaan-2 will reach the lunar orbit where it will circle for 4 days. The lander, named after space pioneer Vikram Sarabhai, will then propel itself to its destination on the south pole of the moon. The 6-wheeled Pragyan rover, standing for wisdom in Sanskrit, is solar powered.
Each and every second of that mission is a very complex mission, and really we are excited and we are very happy also, because that we are always happy to take the challenge for ISRO. That way, this mission is a very challenging mission, but it's what we feel is that the final landing in the 15 minutes is going to be the most terrifying moments for all of us. Yeah, this is a very crucial mission, and we will be having confidence that we will achieve it successfully.
And you will be leaving ISRO as well as the country's footprints, of course, on the moon.
Yes, the rover wheels have the emblem of that ISRO, as well as our emblem of our Indian government of India, so that as that rover moves around the moon surface, this will be imprinted and it will be stay there for centuries. Also, we are going to have the tricolors also in the rover as well as in the lander.
What rover is doing is basically try to see the imaging the soil temperature or some parameters, and also one very important instrument is on whether there is a seismic activity on the moon. That tells you something more insight about the moon. I personally don't remember if anyone has measured whether there is a seismic activity on the moon or not. So probably we'll be the first people to do that.
The story of mission Chandrayaan-2 began in this lab, where the 3 modules, the orbiter, lander and rover, were painstakingly built over 2 years. The orbiter goes round the moon, the lander and rover will soft land on the moon's surface to start their experiments. The highlight of the mission is not just what the experiments can accomplish, it's about the women behind the mission. This is India's first interplanetary mission with 2 women at the helm. Mission Director Ritu Karidhal and Project Director M. Vanita. The two have kept a low profile throughout, but are role models for many. Karidhal, who is Deputy Head of Operations for the Mars mission, says family is as important to her as rocket science.
Since my childhood, I had this passion towards science. I realized that science is not just a subject for me, it was a passion for me. My work basically is in a mission design. So as a mission designer, we had to see what are the real mission objectives of this mission and how it can be achieved. Presently, I am working for Chandrayaan-2. This is the first Indian lunar mission where a rover will rove on the lunar surface. When you are passionate about something, that always keeps you going. It doesn't matter who comes as a hurdle in front of you or what obstacles comes, that all doesn't matter. So without the support of the family members, a women at least can't manage to keep up with the objectives or keep up with the goals.
From barely a handful 2 decades ago to numbering nearly a third of ISRO's scientists, women have proven themselves many times over. In an unforgiving arena where a small mistake could spell doom, these women have come into their own.
No, this the planet exploration mission we had only the third mission. This one.
Right, so
Then we have the third mission, so we are putting a woman scientist. It's a good, isn't it?
no, that's good. And I'm talking it's the first time we
It's the first time.
First time, yeah.
But there are other places where a lot of the women think they are working
Yes.
on the mission area and
As a
other
project
things.
director,
As a project director, we have women project director and other satellite area.
of course.
Like a communication satellite, which is Anuradha was there.
Right.
Then Earth observer satellite, which is there. Valamiri was there. There were many such things. But interplanetary machines,
A lot of the women scientists told me that I hope a day will come where we'll be just called scientists and not women scientists, because under the lab coat or under our scientific garb that we don, we are just scientists.
Right, and it's quite an achievement. It certainly is something to celebrate, and of course the Indian news media does. I mean, this is quite an amazing achievement in itself. It raises the question which the BBC put to the world, is India a space superpower?
India has an ambitious space program with a plan to send an astronaut into space in 2022. It would only be the fourth country to do so. But why is India investing in space? It's an eye-catching policy, and there's certainly an element of national pride. India's space agency says it wants to harness space tech for national development and research of space science, and to explore planets. But sending an astronaut into space has its critics for a country with such high levels of poverty. However, sending people out of the Earth's atmosphere isn't the only reason India is sending rockets into the sky. In fact, it's very big business. The main focus of which is the launching of satellites into Earth's orbit. And the programme's funding is right up there in the league table of countries with commercial space programs.
Now, this becomes very interesting in the sense that India is right up there in the lead table of commercial space programs. They see it as a way of making money, getting payloads up into space on a reliable basis. These are relative size balls in reference to the numbers of commercial ventures involved in each case, but take a look.
It's a multi-million-dollar industry generating many thousands of high-paying technical jobs and stimulating growth through big contracts in commercial industries. The Indian government currently invests over $1 billion in its space program. That's around 0.4% of its annual budget. With that funding, India has become what is known as a low-cost space power and one of the main destinations for companies and other countries to launch satellites.
Okay, that's it. A low-cost service for launching satellites for companies and other countries. Very interesting business model here. Low-cost space services.
Over 260 so far. These satellites support global telecommunications and have uses in monitoring crops and weather systems. Manned missions and space exploration to the moon and other planets is another matter entirely, as the Indian government often sees its mission to send an astronaut into space as a measure of its position as a global power. But,
as you'll see, it's trying to emerge as a global power here with the Soviets in the lead, the Americans, the Chinese, and the Indians, each with a different design. But the question is whether this is not only viable, but whether it can be sustained and will it yield the kind of return for the Indian people that they're expected to sacrifice to make happen.
is that enough to silence critics?
We do need to have a space program to launch satellites, for instance, which do lots of good for people in India and people on Earth. But I just don't see any real benefit of a manned mission when many other countries have done this already.
Okay, now this is a sober assessment from within India. Space program is important, especially to monitor things like weather and communications And drought alerts. Managing human activity on the Earth's surface is greatly facilitated by a space program. But do we need manned missions, is the question this gentleman asks, and should be asked, in fact, of all space programs. What's the use of sending humans with all the risks and attendant added expense for that, when these things can now be done by remote robotic instrumentation? That's the big question, and it's being put very frankly in India at this point.
Exploration has its critics, but we humans are born explorers. For some, it's about finding new places and stretching human imagination. For others, it's about resources and the survival of our species.
Okay, well, it's about resources and the survival of our species. Well, the question is whether, in fact, the way in which we're using resources to do this is jeopardizing the survival of the species, not extending it, not expanding it, not, in fact, improving it. But there's been a kind of craze all over the world for new frontiers in space. This is pretty staggering when you see it. It's actually now available in America on a regular basis because of the celebrations for the moon landing 50 years ago. The New Yorker has written it up recently in May in terms of the race to develop the moon, with great pictures of frontiers-like structures, these old Conestoga wagons, being driven by space-suited individuals and guided by radars, the race to the moon. What's changed in the last 50 years since we were there initially as a manned space operation? Well, what's changed is that there's the emergence of an amazingly powerful new set of billionaires on the Earth's surface. Some of them are based in Silicon Valley, and they're competing with one another, whether it's Elon Musk or Bezos, head of Amazon. And the billionaires are wanting to invest in space. So just like the Indians are interested in it for its investment values, the billionaire space race seems to be a new feature of what we're focusing on at this point. And in fact, we're not alone. China's commercial space industry takes off with a successful orbital launch. China, we think of as a state power, not dealing with sort of commercial operations. But I guess we need to look again at that, because the question will be whether it's limited to state actors. It seems that China's new effort is to engage private investors as well. So that'll be something to keep an eye on, especially since it's going to intrude upon the life of everyone on the Earth's surface. The whole question of whether we can afford it as a human species, not just as a nation state. The Indians, the Americans, the French have announced new plans for space exploration and space deployment of weapons. Very interesting problem. But in addition, we now seem to have commercial efforts within China. And it's something that we really want to keep a look at to see if, in fact, we have any control on the nation-state level with things that are happening. If you look out to the transition studies, you can take a look at China and commercial material and call up the stories about it from time to time. It'll be interesting to see if we can monitor this from the English-speaking world. China's commercial space race takes off.
因此，我认为这个成功是一个非常好的一个提议，它是标志性的事情。
新晋能源公司呢，到目前为止成立了大概3年多的时间。双曲线1号的这个研制时间呢，从固体动力研制开始呢，到现在，大概是1年左右的时间。在全世界的一个运载火箭的这个研制史上，新晋荣耀第1枚火箭的研制效率，应该说是属于相当高的。
Okay, there you have it from Xinhua News, which is, in fact, Chinese government news reporting on the private sector emerging as a space contender. And we now have it in India as well. So we can expect to see more of this, I would think, particularly as China and India compete with one another for the business of putting commercial things in space. Take a look. I think it's pretty extraordinary. The question is whether moonwalks and Mars landings and all of the race to space effort are fueling a kind of technology of perpetual expansion, as if we're going anywhere else off this increasingly hot planet. Shouldn't we be focusing the science instead on the science of human survival on the only inhabitable spaceship in the known universe, the only blue planet discovered yet in all of the known universe? If civilization is to survive, we need to struggle to create a new kind of citizen science alliance that's going to focus on survival and a transition to a just and sustainable future